Well, we had, for the first time in our hands, a long-range interceptor. It was clear that the F-4 was designed to fill a very deficient gap. We had entered a period when attack was high speed. We needed standoff. We needed quick responsiveness. We needed a all-weather capability, and that's what we achieved in the F-4.
If you had it to do all over again, is there anything you would do to change the design of the F-4 or the test program?
No, I wouldn't change a thing.
Alright guys, welcome back to DCS World. I'm Spud, as always. And today we're taking a look at how to start up your cold and dark F-4E Phantom II, but specifically we're going to be digging into the real-life procedures for a Scramble Cartridge Start, as described in the US Air Force 1979 F-4E-1 manual. These procedures require you to have performed an exterior and interior pre-flight inspection of your Phantom, performed an engine and control surfaces functional check, the INS pre-aligned and set into heading store, and you have your jet cocked for scramble according to local area policy and regulations. Whether you're in Reykjavík covering the GUIK Gap from Bears and Backfires, or you're standing alert at Rephidim waiting to tangle with Egyptian and Soviet MiGs over the Sinai, or you might be at Bien Hoa near Saigon, prepared for the call you never hope comes, Broken Arrow. But because some of the most famous and well-known examples of F-4E Phantom II crews scrambling and flying into incredible odds have occurred with the Israeli Air Force, we find ourselves at Rephidim Air Base in the Sinai at the height of the War of Attrition, to demonstrate just how fast you can get a double ugly up into the air. So let's get started. Well, looks like we got lucky here. We can hear the scramble klaxon sounding. We've got our floodlights turned on, powered by our ship's battery, as well as our flashlight to make things as bright and easy to see as possible for you guys as we move through today's tutorial. When it comes to the startup procedure, we want to ensure that we don't ingest any of the noxious gas and fumes emanated by the cartridge itself and our J79 engines throughout the start procedure. That means we want to get on our helmet first here. And once our helmet and oxygen mask are put on, we want to come down to our oxygen panel and open up the supply valve and ensure that we have 100% oxygen selected for a cartridge start. Next, we want to close the canopy to prevent as much smoke as possible from entering the cockpit. Using the number 2 key on your keyboard, we'll head to the back seat and close Jester's canopy as well. Once you're back in the front seat, you're ready for the crew chief to install the cartridges into our J79 engines. Open up the Jester wheel, go to the crew chief option, air source, and on the secondary menu, come down to load start cartridges. This takes just a moment and then you'll be ready to actually fire up your engines. At this point, if you have a split throttle on your HOTAS in your home cockpit, I recommend unlocking them so that way you can operate them independently. I also highly recommend that you bind the ignition switches for both the left throttle and the right throttle onto 2 discrete buttons at the base of your throttle for easy access. When starting up your F4, there's a lot of pressing and holding buttons and moving and manipulating your throttles all at the same time. So at this point, we're ready to fire up our engines. The startup procedure with cartridges is slightly different from that of a normal pneumatic start. First, we want to locate the engine master switches. We're going to fire up the right-hand engine first, so we're going to turn on the master switch for the right-hand engine. Next, we'll move to the right-hand console, and against the right wall of the cockpit, we'll find the generator switches, and we'll turn on the right generator. Moving back to the throttle, we want to press and hold the ignition switch for the right-hand throttle. We're then going to move the throttle out of the cutoff detent to the idle detent, then move the throttle up to 50% and back down to idle. At this point, we're now ready to fire the cartridge and start up the engine. Locate the engine start switch just forward of the engine master switches. Give it a right click to fire the right-hand cartridge. We can see our RPM rising, and when light off occurs, we can release the ignition switch on the right-hand throttle. Because with a cartridge start, we have the generator switch on for the right-hand engine. As soon as the engine stabilizes at idle, we'll start to get some dialogue from Jester, who wants to align the INS as fast as possible for our scramble situation. The engine will stabilize at 65% RPM, plus or minus 1%. And if you see any abnormal engine indications during cartridge start, you want to abort the start as soon as possible to prevent a fire. We're now ready to start the left-hand engine. We're just going to repeat the exact same actions that we did with the right-hand engine. Left engine master on, left generator on, press and hold the left-hand throttle ignition switch, bring the throttle out of the cutoff point, up to 50%, and back to idle. And we're ready to fire the left-hand cartridge with a left click of the engine start switch.
Yep.
There's the light off. We can release the ignition switch on the left throttle. And we'll tell Jester that we want a heading memory alignment since it's available to us today, and that'll be the fastest way to get us off the ground. You can see that everything kind of happens all at the same time right there, so you gotta talk to Jester as well as monitor the engine's indicators to ensure that your startup is going normally. Alright, there's 64% RPM on the left-hand engine. That is all looking fantastic. And at this point, we can start to get all of our systems online and ready to go for taxi. The USAF-1 manual for a scramble start specifies a more or less right-hand to left-hand flow across the cockpit. Let's go ahead and get our nose-down trim set first for takeoff. This is easy to forget, and I always like to get it first because of that. Next, we can start our right to left flow across the cockpit. Our TACAN is already set to Rephidim, so we'll bring the TACAN to transmit receive. We'll turn on our radio to transmit receive plus guard, and we'll set our frequencies to the appropriate frequencies to get in touch with our GCI as fast as possible once we leave the ground to find those MiGs. IFF master is going to go to the norm position, and then we'll flow from right to left across the instrument panel. We'll uncage our standby ADI, ensure that our HSI and ADI are set to nav computer for INS navigation. We'll reset our KDEC, reset our altimeter, enter in the correct altimeter setting for the weather in your mission, uncage the radar altimeter, and set the bug to the correct altitude pre-briefed for an altitude warning for your mission. We'll keep moving on down. We'll turn on our anti-skid, and now that our cartridge start is complete, we can select normal oxygen on our oxygen panel.
Ready to taxi.
The INS alignment is now ready to go, and if you miss Jester's verbal callout, he almost always turns on the RWR system in your aircraft as soon as his INS is up and ready to go. We can bring our reference system to primary, and completing the flow on back at the left-hand side of the cockpit, we'll bring our stability augmentation switches online. We'll kind of reset our track IR here, and we'll bring our flaps and stabs to out and down.
Slats out.
And we'll finish off at the very back side of the left-hand console. The USAF-1 manual for the F-4E can kind of be a little bit unclear on this, and it can change from year to year, but in some scramble situations, you may want to have the crew chief also check your speed brakes right before you're ready to taxi. So we'll get that done here.
Speed brakes out. Speed brakes in.
We'll get our LCOS set to cage, and we'll adjust the brightness if needed. That looks pretty good for today. We will reset our master caution, and we'll turn on our DSCG panel by moving the switch to the radar position. We'll open up the Jester radial once again, and have the crew chief remove the wheel chocks.
Rudder. And the wheel chocks are out. Okay, sir, you're all set. Have a safe flight. Disconnecting.
Alright, at this point we have the wheel chocks removed and we're able to start our taxi. We'll first lock our throttles back together on our HOTAS in our home cockpit, so that way we can operate the throttles together easily. As we start to roll, we'll perform a brakes check. Brakes are good. Next, we'll perform an NGS or nose gear steering check. We'll press and hold the NGS button and wiggle the rudders left and right. And it sounds like Jester is fired up in the back seat and ready to go. He's probably glad to get something done after a whole bunch of boredom.
Okay, tell me, how low are we flying today?
We are going to be flying pretty darn low today.
Roger that.
And that dialogue option there is to help prevent Jester from inadvertently ejecting on you when flying rather low. Short of the runway here, we can perform our pre-takeoff checks. We want to ensure that our pitot heat is turned on, our IFF is set to norm, our reference system is set to primary, our stability and augmentation switches are turned on, our flaps and slats are out and down, and we'll do a final sweep around the cockpit and ensure that everything is ready to rock and roll. Alright, everything is looking good. We are ready to take the active. Check final, make sure nobody's going to come in and land on us. If you feel that you have to push the throttles up rather far in the F4 to actually get the aircraft rolling, don't worry, you're not dragging the brakes or anything like that. It is a normal occurrence in this aircraft. Get lined up on the runway. Get stationary. We'll start to run up the throttles towards 85% RPM. We'll release the brakes. And we're still going to hold the NGS button, but we'll release it once we hit 70 knots of airspeed and our tail becomes aerodynamically effective to control centerline. Alright, and we'll start to rotate off the runway. Gear up.
Gears moving.
Flaps and slats up to L.
Gear up.
We'll reset our master caution. And we'll get in contact with red crown for vectors towards the MiGs coming across the Suez Canal. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys, and I hope that it is illuminating to show you just how quickly you can get an F-4E Phantom II off the deck. Of course, once you're not actually trying to explain the startup procedure in a tutorial video, you'll be able to do it even faster. So, thanks for watching guys, please leave a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Fly safe out there, and enjoy this beautiful game and this awesome new jet.